I have discovered from my experience the one great secret of success for all worldly undertakings. Now that the number of my days is nearly counted, I deem it wise to give to the generations that are to follow the benefit of this powerful knowledge. I tell of that which I consider to be the meat within the nut. What matters how the shell be broken, just so that the meat can be obtained and rendered useful? Much have I wearied my brain on how best to describe this recipe for success that I have discovered. It seems advisable to give it as it came to me, so I will tell you the story of my life. If I am able to convey the secret, people born generations after I am dust will bless me for the words I write. My father was a sailor. Early in life, though, he forsook his vocation and settled on a plantation in the colony of Virginia. There, some years after, I was born. This event took place in 1642, now about 100 years ago. It would have been far better for my father to have hearkened to the wise counsel of my mother and remain in the calling of his education, but he would not have it so, and the good vessel that he captained was traded for the land of which I spoke. Thinking on this, here is the first lesson to be learnt.
A person should not be blinded to whatsoever merit exists in the opportunity which they have in hand. Remember that 1,000 promises for the future count as nothing when compared to the possession of a single piece of silver.
When I was 10 years old, my mother died, and 2 years after that, my father. I was an only child, and so was left alone, but there were friends who cared for me at the time. They offered me a home beneath their roof. I accepted their hospitality for about 5 months. Of my early life, I will relate nothing here. Since my father had left me nothing, as a youth, with 16 guineas earned from my labors, I set sail for Boston town. It was there I began work as a carpenter. As the years went by, I prospered, and at 27 I owned the whole shipyard, wherein less than 4 years earlier I had worked for hire. But fortune is a jade who must be coerced. She will not be coddled. And here is the second lesson to be learned.
Dame Fortune is ever elusive, and can only be retained by strong purpose. Deal with her softly, and she will forsake you for a stronger man.
About this time, disaster struck. A great fire ravaged my shipyard, leaving me nothing but blackened debts. I had no money. Seeking assistance for a new start, I asked friends for a loan, but the fire that had burned my living also seemed to consume their sympathies. So it happened within a short time. Not only had I lost all, but I was hopelessly in debt to others. For this I was thrown into prison. It was there, in prison, that I became utterly despondent. When I was released a year later, I was not the happy, contented man I once was. Life has many pathways, and a great number of them lead downwards. Some are very steep, others are less abrupt, but no matter what the angle of descent, they arrive at the same destination, failure. And here begins the third lesson of my life.
Failure exists only in the grave. A person, being alive, has not yet failed. Always they may turn about and climb back along the same path they have descended. There may be a path that is less steep and one more adaptable to a person's condition.
When I came out of prison, I was penniless. In all the world, I possessed nothing beyond the poor clothes I wore on my back and a walking stick. But being a skilled workman, I soon found employment at good wages. But having known what it was like to be an owner of a shipyard, I was dissatisfied. I became morose and sullen. To cheer myself and to forget all my losses, I passed my evenings at the local tavern. Not that I was a great drinker, but it was there I could laugh and sing and exchange jokes and tales with some rather questionable companions. It is from this that I tell you the fourth lesson.
Seek comrades among the industrious, for those who are idle will sap your energies from you.
It was there at the inn I told stories of my disasters and of the men whom I considered had wronged me because they had turned their backs when I was in need. I also found childish delight in a kind of stealing from my employers, for each day I took time off from my work, time for which my employer was paying me. This continued until my employer found out, and I again found myself on the street with no employment and without character. I knew with my reputation that I could not find employment in all of Boston town. It was at that time that I regarded myself as a failure. It was like I had descended the steep side of a mountain and lost my foothold. It seemed the farther I slid, the faster I plummeted. Then the day came when I possessed no food or clothes. I found myself like a beggar, except those rare times when I could earn a few pence or even a shilling. I could not find work, and became like a skeleton in body and in spirit. Not only the physical part of me was sick, but also the mental part. I was sick unto death. I imagined that I was rejected by the whole world. I had sunk very low indeed. And here begins the fifth and final lesson of my life. But it cannot be contained in one paragraph. So it must be told in the adventures I described to you, my dear reader. I remember well the day I woke up. In truth, it was at night when I did wake from my sleep. I slept under a pile of shavings at the time in the corner of a carpenter's shop. The night was cold and I was chilled. Strange, for I had been dreaming of light and warmth and all kinds of good things. As you hear my story, you will imagine me to have been crazed. But through this, I trust you will find that my journey will help you with yours. It was that dream I was having that brought me to the belief, the real knowledge, that I was possessed of two identities. It was as if I had a double. I had another self. The dream had impressed this on me. In it, I was toiling through a snowstorm and great wind and came upon a house. I peered through a window, and I saw that other being, that other part of me. He was rosy with health. Before him burned a glowing fire of logs. There was a conscious power and force in his manner. He was physically and mentally muscular. I knocked upon the door of the house. He opened it and warmly bade me enter. He motioned me to a chair beside the fire. He did not say a word. And when I was warm, I went forth again into the snowstorm. I was troubled by the contrast between us, and it was then I woke. But here comes the strange part of my tale, for when I did wake, I was not alone. There was a kind of presence with me. This presence was invisible to others, but very real to me. The presence looked like me, yet it was quite unlike me too. The eyes, clear and direct, were full of purpose. They glowed with enthusiasm. The lips and chin, the whole shape of the face and figure were dominant and determined. This presence, this other self, was steadfast and self-reliant. I was cowering and filled with nervous trembling. When the presence turned away, I followed, and throughout the day I never lost sight of it. As I journeyed with my presence, I was taken to the places that I once dreaded to enter, to offices where I had carried on business before. Throughout the day I followed the presence, and at evening I pursued him into an inn, famous for its cheer and good living. I began to call my presence my better self, for that is what it was. When I awoke from sleep, there was the presence beside me. The second day was not unlike the first. I was doomed to wait outside those places where the presence entered with boldness and daring. Many a time I started to speak to the presence, but the words rattled in my throat, unintelligible. So the days with my better self went on, and gradually I discovered that the constant contact with the presence was having an effect on me. Then one night, I awoke among the barrels and the shavings. I sensed the presence was nearby. I summoned up all the courage I had and spoke to it. "Who are you?" "I am that I am, and I am he who you have been, and am he who you may be again, and am he who you were, and whom you have cast out for other company. I am the man made in the image of God, who once possessed your body. Once we dwelt within it together. You became selfish and exacting until I could no longer abide with you. Therefore I stepped out. There is a plus entity and a minus entity within every human being that is born into the world. Whichever one of these is favored by the flesh becomes dominant. When this happens, the other entity is inclined to abandon its habitation. I am the plus entity of yourself. You are the minus entity. I own all things. You possess nothing. That body which we both inhabited is mine, but it is unclean, and I will not dwell within it. Cleanse it, and I will again take possession. Why have you pursued me? You have pursued me, not I you. You can live without me for a time, but your path leads downward, and its end is death. You should clean your house and invite me to enter. Step aside then from the brain and the will. Cleanse them of your presence. Only on that condition will I ever occupy them again. But my brain has lost its power, and my will is a weak thing now. Can you repair them? Now listen. To the plus entity of a man, all things are possible. The world belongs to him. He fears nothing. He stops at nothing. He asks no privileges. He demands them. He dominates and cannot cringe. His requests are orders. Opposition flees at his approach. And so I slept again. And then when I awoke, I seemed to be in a different world. The sun was shining high, and I heard the song of birds. My body, which the day before was trembling, had become strong and vigorous and filled with energy. I left the bed of shavings and the workshop, knowing I would never have to return there again. I remembered my conversation with the presence in the night and looked around for it, but I could not see it. Then, cowering outside in the corner of the yard, I saw a puny, shuddering figure huddled in the corner. It was disheveled and unkempt. It moved towards me, tottering, and then I laughed out loud, for I had a sense that this was the minus entity, and yes, that the plus entity was within me. I had a vague thought that this was so at the time, but was not sure. But the day lay ahead, and I was eager and keen to be about the work ahead of me. There was so much for me to do. It was funny. I had not thought about these things the day before. But now was now. Today was with me, and it had just begun. I walked to my old tavern. I smiled with cheer as I entered and exchanged all kinds of salutations from the people there. Men who had ignored me for months graciously bowed as I passed them. I told the landlord with some authority that I would take again the same room I used to rent. Then I visited with haste my old workshops. There was a huge cart in the yard, and men were loading it with casks for shipment. I asked no questions, but grabbed the barrels and helped them load until it was done. Then I entered my old workshop. There was my vacant bench. I took off my coat, and with eagerness was at once at the bench, shaving the barrel slats with vigor. It was an hour later when the master workman came into the room. He stopped in surprise when he saw me. Already there was a large pile of shaven slats completed by me on the bench. I nodded, and even before he could question me, I told him I had returned to work. He simply nodded and passed on to check the other men. And so, with these accounts ends the fifth and final lesson to be learned. It was from that moment on that I prospered and became a successful man. Since then I have 2 shipyards and have enjoyed prosperity and good things. So now again I would ask you, dear reader, to heed the following lessons of my tale,